The dinner table went dead silent the second Diane pointed her finger at me and hissed, "Where is Richard's watch?" I blinked, genuinely confused. "What watch?" She leaned closer, venom dripping from every word. "Don't play dumb with me." The room held its breath. Then she screamed it for everyone to hear. "He stole it right off the dresser." Forks froze midair. Wineglasses stopped halfway to lips. I felt every eye in that dining room turn on me like a spotlight. Welcome back to Dad's cruel revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, because every villain in this story got exactly what they deserved. Be sure to subscribe and drop a comment. What would you have done in my place? My name is not important. What matters is that I had married into a family that smiled at me for 6 years and was now ready to burn me down over a $15,000 watch I had never even touched. Richard, my father-in-law, stood slowly from his chair, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Empty your pockets," he said flatly, like a judge delivering a sentence. I looked at my wife, Vanessa, waiting for her to say something, anything. She just stared at her plate. My hands trembled as I turned my pockets inside out in front of 12 relatives, in front of her parents, in front of people I had spent Christmases and birthdays with. Nothing. Of course nothing. But Diane wasn't satisfied. "Check the car," she snapped. "Check everywhere." I stood there, humiliated, exposed, and completely blindsided, with absolutely no idea that this accusation was only the opening move in something far darker. They searched my car in the driveway like I was a criminal on television. Richard's brother, Uncle Frank, rifled through my glove compartment while Diane stood at the window, arms folded, smirking like she already knew the outcome. "Nothing here either," Frank called out, sounding almost disappointed. Diane's face twisted. "Then he hid it somewhere. People like him always find a way. People like him." Like I wasn't even a person with a name in that family anymore, just a suspect, a stranger who married their daughter and apparently couldn't be trusted around anything valuable. I turned to Vanessa again, silently begging her to step in. She finally spoke, but not in my defense. "Maybe we should just let them look, so this ends faster," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. That single sentence hurt worse than anything Diane had screamed. My own wife wasn't defending me, she was managing me, like I was an inconvenience at her parents' dinner party rather than her husband being publicly accused of theft. Richard finally raised a hand to stop the search. "Fine. Maybe it's not here." But his tone wasn't an apology, it was a warning. "But mark my words, if that watch doesn't turn up by next week, we are calling the police." The threat landed like a slap. I hadn't stolen anything, yet I was already being sentenced. I drove home that night in silence next to my wife, staring at the road, replaying every second of that dinner, wondering how 6 years of trust had evaporated in 6 minutes over a watch I never saw. By the following week, the story had spread through the entire family like wildfire. My phone buzzed constantly, not with support, but with distance. Cousins who used to invite me to poker nights suddenly went quiet. Vanessa's aunt canceled a lunch we'd had planned for months, citing a vague excuse. Nobody said it outright, but the message was clear: I was guilty until proven innocent, and in this family, innocence was apparently optional. Vanessa grew colder too, retreating into herself every evening instead of talking to me. "Why won't you just tell me you believe me?" I finally asked her one night, my voice cracking with exhaustion. She sighed. "I do believe you. I don't want to choose between you and my parents." Choose? As if defending your own husband against a false accusation was some kind of unreasonable demand. I realized in that moment I was fighting this battle completely alone. Richard called a family meeting the next Sunday without inviting me. Vanessa came home from it pale and quiet. "They want to bring in a private investigator," she said. "They think you sold it." Sold it. Now I wasn't just a thief in their eyes, I was calculating, cold, someone who'd steal from his own wife's father and cash it in for money. The accusations kept growing heavier, more elaborate, more damning, while the actual watch remained missing and nobody in that family seemed the least bit interested in asking who else might have had access to that dresser that night. The private investigator Richard hired showed up at my office. My office. He flashed a badge-like ID to my receptionist and asked pointed questions about my financial troubles in front of my coworkers. Within a day, whispers spread through my workplace. My manager called me in, visibly uncomfortable. "Is everything all right at home? Someone's been asking questions here." I wanted to disappear into the floor. That night, Richard called me directly for the first time since the dinner. His voice was ice cold. "We're giving you one more chance. Return the watch, no police, no more questions. Otherwise, this gets ugly." I nearly dropped the phone. "I don't have your watch, Richard. I never touched it." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Everyone lies at first." Then he hung up. Vanessa found me sitting alone in the dark kitchen that night, staring at nothing. "Maybe you should talk to a lawyer," she whispered, and something in her tone told me she was starting to hedge her bets, protecting herself instead of protecting us. I looked at the woman I married and felt a stranger looking back. My reputation was crumbling at work, my marriage was fracturing, and an entire family had convicted me without a single shred of evidence. That night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, something shifted inside me. If they wanted a thief, I would show them exactly who the real one was. I would find the truth myself, and when I did, there would be no mercy left in me for any of them. I stopped defending myself out loud. Instead, I went silent, the kind of silence that looks like surrender but is actually preparation. I stopped attending family functions, stopped responding to accusatory texts, and started paying very close attention to every small detail I had previously ignored. Something had been nagging at me since that first dinner. Tyler, Vanessa's younger brother, had left the party unusually early that night, right after the toast, right before Diane discovered the watch missing. Tyler had always been the golden child who could do no wrong, charming, well-dressed, always broke despite a good job, always borrowing money just until payday. I remembered whispers from years ago about gambling debts Richard had quietly paid off to keep the family name clean. Nobody in that family ever questioned Tyler. Nobody searched his car that night. Nobody accused him of anything, ever. I started watching him more closely at the few gatherings I still attended, staying just enough to observe without engaging. I noticed a new watch on his wrist, not Richard's missing one, but expensive, out of place for someone who was supposedly always broke. I noticed how quickly he changed the subject whenever the missing watch came up. I noticed how Diane's eyes would flicker toward him nervously before snapping back to glare at me. Something didn't add up, and for the first time since that humiliating dinner, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose. If Tyler had that watch, or knew where it went, I was going to find proof, real, undeniable proof, and I was going to make sure the entire family saw it. I started small. I asked a cousin, casually, if anyone had seen Tyler struggling with money lately. She hesitated, then admitted he'd been borrowing from multiple relatives for a business opportunity that never seemed to materialize. Business opportunity. I'd heard that phrase before, years ago, right before his gambling debts nearly bankrupted him. One evening, I accidentally ran into Tyler at a gas station near his apartment. We made small talk, and I noticed his car was messier than usual, fast food wrappers, a crumpled receipt sticking out from under the seat. As he stepped away to pay, I glanced down and caught a partial name printed on that receipt, a pawn shop 3 towns over. My heart pounded. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a thread, and I intended to pull it until the entire fabric came undone. I drove to that pawn shop the next day, nerves rattling in my chest. The owner, an older man named Carl, was cautious at first when I asked about recent watch sales. I explained, carefully, that a family heirloom had gone missing and I was trying to help locate it. Carl studied me for a long moment before pulling out a logbook. "We don't usually share this," he said, "but if it helps a family, I'll make an exception." He flipped through pages and stopped on an entry from the week after that dinner, a luxury watch, pawned by a young man matching Tyler's description, for $11,000. My hands were shaking as I photographed the page. I finally had something real. Carl agreed to check his security footage archive for me, and 2 days later, he called. "You're going to want to see this," he said. I drove over immediately, and he pulled up grainy but unmistakable footage. Tyler, in the same jacket he'd worn to that family dinner, walking into the pawn shop just 4 days after Richard's watch disappeared, sliding something across the counter. I asked Carl if I could get a copy for legal purposes, and to my relief, he agreed, understanding the gravity of what I was uncovering. I now had a photographed logbook entry, timestamped footage, and a paper trail leading directly to Tyler. But I needed one more piece, proof that the family, particularly Richard and Diane, had suspected Tyler all along and chosen to blame me instead to protect their son's reputation. I remembered Diane's nervous glances toward Tyler at gatherings and decided to test a theory. I called my sister-in-law, the one relative who'd stayed somewhat neutral, and asked delicately if Richard had ever mentioned suspecting anyone else. She hesitated for a long time before admitting, in a hushed voice, that she'd overheard Richard tell Diane privately, "We can't let this touch Tyler again, not after last time." Last time. There had been a last time. This wasn't Tyler's first theft, and Richard and Diane had known, or at least strongly suspected, exactly who took that watch from the very first night. They had let their own son walk free while sacrificing me publicly, without hesitation, without a single moment of doubt. That confirmation lit something cold and unshakable in me. Armed with the pawnshop logbook photograph, the security footage, and my sister-in-law's account, I began quietly building a complete case, piece by piece, the way Richard's private investigator had once tried to build one against me. I hired an actual attorney this time, not to sue anyone yet, but to have everything properly documented and legally verified, so nothing could later be dismissed as fabricated or exaggerated. My attorney reviewed the footage and logbook entry and confirmed what I already suspected. This was more than enough to clear my name completely and, if I chose, to pursue charges against Tyler for the original theft. But clearing my name quietly wasn't going to be enough. Richard and Diane had humiliated me in front of the entire family, threatened me with police, sent an investigator into my workplace, and let their own son hide behind my destroyed reputation for months. Quiet vindication wasn't justice. They needed to feel, publicly, exactly what they had put me through. Vanessa, meanwhile, had grown increasingly distant, sensing I was working on something but afraid to ask what. One night she finally asked directly, "What are you planning?" I looked at her, this woman who had watched her own family tear me apart without lifting a finger to stop it, and said simply, "I'm finding the truth. You'll see it soon enough, along with everyone else." She didn't push further, but I saw fear flicker behind her eyes, the fear of someone who suspected the ground beneath her family was about to crack wide open, and that she had chosen the wrong side when it mattered most. Richard and Diane's 30th wedding anniversary party was scheduled for the following month, a massive gathering with nearly 60 relatives and family friends, the same audience that had witnessed my humiliation months earlier. It was the perfect stage. If they wanted a spectacle to convict me, I would give them one to convict the real thief, and everyone who protected him, in front of the exact same crowd. I quietly confirmed my attendance, which surprised Vanessa given how distant I'd become from the family. I told her simply that I wanted closure, and she accepted that explanation without digging deeper. Behind the scenes, I coordinated with my attorney to ensure the pawnshop footage and logbook copy were properly certified as evidence, ready to be presented if needed, and I arranged for Carl, the pawnshop owner, to be available by phone if any family member tried to dispute the footage's authenticity. I also reached out privately to two cousins who had remained kind to me throughout the ordeal, the only two people in that family who had never joined the accusations. I didn't reveal everything, but I asked them to simply pay close attention during the party and trust me when things unfolded. The night before the anniversary party, I sat alone reviewing every piece of evidence one final time, the logbook page, the timestamped footage, my sister-in-law's account of Richard's private confession about Tyler. Everything was ready. 6 months of silent suffering, humiliation, and quiet investigation had led to this single evening, and I intended to make absolutely certain that this family would never forget it. The anniversary party was in full swing when I asked Richard, politely but firmly, for 2 minutes to address the family. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but with 60 guests watching, refusing would have looked far worse than allowing it. I stood at the front of that same dining room where I'd been humiliated months earlier and looked directly at Diane. "You accused me of stealing Richard's watch," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Tonight, I'd like to finally show everyone what actually happened." I connected my phone to the television and played the pawnshop footage. Gasps rippled through the room as Tyler's face appeared clearly on screen, sliding Richard's watch across the counter just 4 days after the dinner. I held up the printed logbook entry, Tyler's name and the transaction clearly documented. The room fell into stunned silence, the same silence I'd endured months earlier, except this time it wasn't directed at me. Diane's face went white. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then I delivered the final blow. And Richard already knew, I said calmly. He told Diane privately, quote, "We can't let this touch Tyler again, not after last time." My sister-in-law, standing near the back, nodded slowly, confirming it publicly without me even asking. 60 relatives turned toward Richard and Diane, the same people who had turned on me months earlier, now witnessing the truth unravel in real time. Tyler, cornered, red-faced, tried to stammer an excuse about borrowing the watch, but nobody was buying it anymore. The party dissolved into chaos within minutes. Relatives who had shunned me for months suddenly surrounded me with apologies, while others turned furiously on Richard and Diane for letting an innocent person be destroyed to protect their son. Diane tried desperately to defend Tyler, insisting it was just a misunderstanding, but the footage didn't lie, and neither did my sister-in-law's testimony confirming Richard's private admission. I turned to Vanessa, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the full weight of what her silence had cost us. "You knew something was wrong," I said quietly, "and you chose comfort over truth." She had no response, because there wasn't one that could undo 6 months of watching me get destroyed while she stayed silent to keep peace with her parents. I contacted local authorities that same week and filed an official theft report against Tyler, supported by the certified pawnshop footage and logbook documentation. Richard, terrified of the growing scandal spreading through his country club and business circles, quietly paid restitution to avoid a lengthy public trial, but the damage to his reputation was already done. Word travels fast in tight social circles, and everyone now knew exactly what kind of family covered for a thief while destroying an innocent man's life. Diane, humiliated beyond anything she'd inflicted on me, stopped attending the same social events entirely. Tyler, facing formal charges, was finally forced to answer for far more than just one stolen watch, as 2 other prior borrowing incidents Richard had quietly buried over the years suddenly resurfaced under scrutiny. Vanessa and I separated 3 weeks after that anniversary party. There was no dramatic fight, no final confrontation, just a quiet, mutual understanding that trust, once shattered that completely, doesn't rebuild itself with apologies alone. She asked, tearfully, if there was any way back. I looked at her and said, "You had 6 months to choose me. You chose them instead, every single time." Then I walked out for good. Richard's business partners, having heard the full story through the tight-knit social circle he'd spent decades cultivating, quietly distanced themselves from him over the following months. His reputation, built over 30 years of careful appearances, crumbled in a matter of weeks. Diane, once the loudest voice accusing me publicly, now avoided every family gathering where my name might come up, unable to face the relatives who once stood beside her against me. Tyler pled guilty to the theft, paying full restitution and completing mandated community service. His golden child status permanently destroyed the moment that footage played. I heard, months later, that Richard and Diane's marriage strained under the weight of the scandal, each quietly blaming the other for covering up Tyler's history for so long. As for me, I rebuilt everything, my career, my peace, my life, completely free of a family that had been ready to convict me the instant it protected someone they loved more. They wanted a thief. I gave them the truth instead, cold, documented, and undeniable. And in the end, the only thing stolen that night was their comfortable illusion that loyalty could ever outweigh justice.